But first, the Coate Inquiry into Victoria's hotel quarantine disaster tomorrow is holding what's called an extraordinary sitting at 2 o'clock. Now, this sitting was a surprise when announced late on Friday afternoon, given the number of times to date that the inquiry has declined to recall witnesses. And its very late move to start requesting phone records, as you know, could have happened months and months ago. It's only been in recent weeks. Now, you need to understand that the Coate Inquiry is not a judicial inquiry. The Premier and others like to imply that it is, given it's run by a former family court judge, but it's not a judicial inquiry. And anyone who's followed this sorry tale can see it's got none of the powers a truth-telling inquiry like this must have. Over the weekend, we've seen it all once again. Missing emails from Victorian Chief Health Officer Brett Sutton, well, they suddenly turned up in the Age newspaper. Emails not handed over by his department to Coate, and emails that would seem to show he knew about the use of private security on the very day the hotel quarantine was announced back in March, and not, as he told the inquiry, months and months later. That's what the whole contortion about New Zealand travellers into Victoria was about on Saturday and Sunday. Nothing to do with New Zealand. I mean, New Zealand's COVID-free. But it was all a smokescreen put out there to stop probing questions on these Sutton emails. Most of the media fell for it, at least on the weekend they did. Sky News didn't, and nor did the Herald Sun. Tomorrow, when the Coate Inquiry sits again, it's very clear now, forget the creeping assumption line they tried to get up a few weeks ago, it's very clear that if they're after the truth, well, Jennifer Coate has a lot more work to do. That is, of course, if they are after the truth. And that truth must be why Victoria went it alone, using private security guards to guard quarantine hotels when every other state in this country used their police force and the Australian Defence Force. And it's a decision that's cost lives and decimated the economy of Victoria, a decision that's kept 5 million Melbourne residents in lockdown for 21 weeks and brutalised the mental health of so many, particularly our young. No other state did what Victoria has done. No other state went it alone. And no other state has buried the numbers we have in Victoria. 816 dead. While across the rest of Australia, all states and territories combined, it's 88 lives lost. Victoria, 816. The rest of the country, 88. And the decision that Daniel Andrews and his government made to go it alone, it matters. It matters to all of those lives lost and the businesses hit hard. And it's this very truth that the Coate Inquiry must be determined to uncover, or Jennifer Coate, stand aside and say that only a Royal Commission can take it up from here. Who made the decision for Victoria to go it alone? Why did they make that decision? Was it just that Victoria Police, we're told, didn't want to babysit returning travellers? Or was there something more to the decision to use private security in the first place, and in particular, why one firm might have been chosen over others? Why was the ADF rejected? Why has the Premier tried to say over and over again that the ADF was an offer, that if he had known about the ADF, well, he might have done something differently? He said that in his evidence to Coate, or all sorts of other weasel words about thinking that the PM's offer was for extensive troop numbers for New South Wales only, when the Premier's own press release says otherwise. Here it is from Daniel Andrews, Friday, March 27, the very day that National Cabinet made its decision. And it says, it has also been agreed that the Australian Defence Force will be engaged to support the implementation of these arrangements. And as every Victorian knows, Daniel Andrews never made good on that promise, despite the PM following it up time and time again. Now, tomorrow, Coate has very serious questions that should be the focus of where this inquiry goes from here. It's not just the disagreement on important facts between the Premier and former Health Minister Jenny Mikakos. It's not just the testimony of the former head of the Premier's department that should be retested now, given the forgotten phone call that's forced his resignation, or the Emergency Services Commissioner's evidence that he later recanted after that evidence was shown to be at odds with evidence of his minister, Lisa Neville, under oath to Coate. It's also not the fundamental question of how a government could decide to go against a national cabinet decision and put hotel quarantine in the hands of untrained security guards rather than police and military on the basis of this absolutely rubbish idea of a creeping assumption. It's bigger and deeper than all of that. It goes to who actually got these contracts worth tens of millions of dollars, why proper process wasn't followed, and who these various companies are connected to. I want you to know all of this. Jennifer Coate should want to know all of this too, if she's serious about protecting her own legal reputation. Now, having decided not to use Victoria Police, how did the Andrews government choose the three security firms that they did to run Victoria's botched quarantine? One of them, MSS Security, well, they were already on the government's pre-approved and vetted tender list. Wilson Security, well, they were the same. It's the last one of the three that's important, and I want to look at more closely tonight at them, because this third one, Unified Security, well, they got the lion's share of the security work, and critically, they were not vetted and not on the panel. Now, looking carefully into Unified Security, well, it's an eye-opener. It's majority owned by a character called David Millward. He's what I would have called in Canberra political circles a colourful Sydney identity. He's been involved in two other security companies that have ended up in voluntary administration, owing their creditors millions. David Millward is the bloke at the centre of all these early days when critical decisions were made in rapid-fire time to set up hotel quarantine back in March, and the decisions about who would get this very lucrative work. In Unified Security's case, we're talking about a $30 million contract for 3 months' work. On the day of the National Cabinet decision, when it announced hotel quarantine, well, this Millward character personally gets an email late that night, 1:33 p.m, from the Victorian Jobs Department asking, does he want to do this work? Again, he's not on the vetted list. By 6 a.m. the next day, he's negotiating. Around 9 a.m, he says via text that he's secured 10,000 units of PPE. Masks, gloves, hazmat suits, the whole box and dice. All of this is in evidence to the Coate Inquiry if you're prepared to dig hard enough. It's all there. Now, Millward also says that a lot of his staff are already trained up in the federal government's online COVID infection course. Now, let's just stop there. So 6 a.m, he says, we want in, and 3 hours later, he says he's got almost half his people trained and he's got all this PPE. Well, I followed this up carefully. First, there's no evidence anywhere that anything Millward said was checked. We also know that at this time, back in March, getting PPE, it was tough. You'll remember we struggled to get it into Australia and that the federal government had to use defence workers to set up a local supply chain. Now, I have it confirmed that a private company like Unified would not have had access to the national PPE stockpile, because this was for hospitals and the like. So I take it with a grain of salt that they had what they said they did have. When MSS Security later responded to the offer of this private security work, in writing, MSS said it would take them 3 weeks to get PPE. Unified, well, they told the Andrews government 3 hours. Again, all this is buried in the evidence. On the training front, MSS, they also say they're finding it really tough to train up their people given to the volume of people trying to get online to do the course. Again, I've got it confirmed from the Federal Health Department who run this online training course and the website that after the PM's announcement on that day back in March the 27th and followed up with the Premier saying they were going down the path of using private security, well, over this precise weekend, demand in that online course skyrockets. It went up by 60,000. MSS say again, really tough to get online and do the course. In 3 hours flat, Unified Security says our people are being rapidly trained up. And you can see what's happening here, can't you? Either Unified is fibbing, and as I said, I can't see any evidence that the Jobs Department even tried to verify their claims, or they got a heads up. On the Friday at 12:36, just around lunchtime, before the National Cabinet had even broken up. Remember, Chris Eccles leaves the room. He was then the head of Premier and Cabinet. Well, at the same time, Unified Security's David Millward, he sends an urgent email to all of his staff saying, quick, get online, do your COVID training course and quick, get it all done by 2:30 p.m. Now, 2:30 p.m. was when the insiders knew that the PM was going to announce it all in terms of a press conference about the National Cabinet's decision. Now, why is all of this so important? Well, back on the Saturday morning, when Unified's David Millward responded to that Jobs Department request at 6 a.m. and said, we're in, and by 9 a.m, when he claimed that he had the PPE and all the trained staff, this was later used as a justification to give them a crack at this $30 million contract, even though they weren't on the Victorian Government's preferred tenders list. They got the jump over other companies that were vetted because Unified said, we're good to go, and the vetted company said, PPE and training is going to take some time. Now, in just under 6 hours, by 11:35 a.m, Saturday, March 28, Unified's in, well outside the established rules for procurement, and the Jobs Department Chief, Simon Femister, well, he personally gives the go-ahead for their $30 million payday. Now, the other two vetted security companies, MSS and Wilson, well, they're way behind. I mean, they're still at the starting blocks. While Unified, well, by midnight that same day, they're running the security at Melbourne's first COVID hotel. When other Jobs Department officials arrive at work on the Monday, serious questions start getting asked. How does any company not on the preferred list get a contract like that? $30 million in under 6 hours and no probity to speak of? Some even suggest that the whole thing must be unwound. Indeed, there's a very serious email from an official in the procurement area in the Jobs Department asking why was Unified chosen outside the proper processes, saying that, and I quote, I understand there was an urgency to get things up and running over the weekend, but to have a non-approved firm providing security and effectively enforcing government regulation at quarantine sites off the back of some emails and phone calls represents, he said, a significant risk to individuals involved and the department/government that is not easily mitigated. So how do they get the contract? Who are they? All of this is critical. When questioned about it in the Coate Inquiry, the Minister, who supposedly runs this jobs portfolio, Martin Pakula, well, he says under oath, the first he was aware of Unified and indeed the $30 million contract, he says, under oath, July or August. Now, really, if anything shows that he knew earlier, Martin Pakula, you're gone. Now, there's no mystery that the actual contract between the government and Unified was executed by the Jobs Department Secretary, Simon Femister, in early April. But under contract law, you see, the contract started on the day Unified turned up on the site. That's a Saturday night. So who authorised Femister? And given Femister can't agree to any contract worth $30 million without cabinet or ministerial approval, and he didn't have it back there on the 28th, 29th of March, if he wasn't authorised, well, Simon Femister, you're gone too. Now, it's interesting that when the Victorian Parliament's Public Accounts and Estimates Committee pursues the cost and the background to these three contracts on the 12th of August, Femister's asked how much has been spent on the security contracts so far. And Femister says to a parliamentary inquiry, even though he signed those contracts, I'll forget, he said, I can't say. I can't say. Now, you also need to know this. This is critical. Last week, it was reported that the head of Victoria's anti-corruption watchdog, IBAC, wrote to Jennifer Coate some months back, warning her there was a greater risk of corruption around government contracts and procurement at a time of crisis or emergency. And on Thursday just been, IBAC issued this very significant statement. They said that starting next Monday, it will hold public hearings into allegations of serious corrupt conduct in the awarding of contracts in Victoria's public transport sector. As the IBAC statement says, and I'll quote, the hearing is a part of IBAC's investigation, Operation Esperance it's called, into allegations of serious corrupt conduct during the tendering, procurement and subsequent management of major contracts within V-Line and Metro. IBEX Commissioner, the Honourable Robert Redlich QC, said the hearings will consider whether current senior public officers have improperly influenced the awarding of contracts. He says, and I quote, "These public hearings will examine the integrity of the processes and management of certain major contracts between V-Line, Metro and suppliers." Now, I don't know anything at all about the IBAC inquiry, only IBAC does. And we'll see where IBAC's hearings go next Monday. These hearings will be public. But this I do know. The only other significant contract that Unified Security has in Victoria is a contract with Metro, awarded last year. So I'll say again, I'm not giving up, not going away. I will get to the bottom of this, because 800 dead deserve more than a cover-up.